Hi there, welcome to chapter 4 of The Misadventures of the Family Fletcher. This is written by Dana Alison Levy. Chapter 4 is called In Which the School Day is Discussed. And it says up at the top, Tyler's cell. Dude, I'm stoked for soccer. Meet in yard at 4, K? Socket, sprocket, soccer, stupid phone. The biggest problem with September, in Sam's estimation, was that it still felt like August. It had to be 80 degrees out. He figured as he and Jax walked home from school. Jax was all fired up about his locker with a door, the ice cream vending machine in the cafeteria, and the promise of launching bottle rockets in science later in the year. 4th grade had exceeded his expectations so far. Sam didn't share his brother's excitement. 6th grade, he decided, was one big lecture about how grades were really starting to matter. In fact, his English teacher, who was particularly rabid on the subject, had walked the class through a what-if exercise that had taught him that they ignored his assignments at his parole since it would be leading to a failing mark, repeating 6th grade, and an inability to ever go to college. This outcome seemed a bit harsh for not reading Johnny Tremaine, but Sam hadn't been about to argue with someone whose tie had come loose and whose shirt had come untucked from the effort of threatening them. At least September also meant the start of soccer, which was more than a consolation prize for school. Still, even soccer was making him nervous now, and soccer had never made him nervous before. This coming spring, the players would be chosen for the Shipton Under-15 elite team. If Sam made it, he'd be the youngest player on the team in at least 5 years. And he had a chance. He just had to stay focused. Jax, want to take shots on me when we get home? After you walk Sir Puggleton, I mean. Sam had to admit, Jax had a pretty tough shot when it was actually near the net. Unfortunately, they often went wide. One of his shots had careened across the bushes and hit the new neighbor's ancient dog as it was getting out of the car. Oh, poor dog. And you need to get my ball back from Mr. Nelson. Good luck with that. He's a serious waste of space, that guy. Did you hear him yesterday? He yelled at Dad for mowing the lawn. At noon! Who freaks out if it's noisy at noon? Sam shook his head, disgusted with the stupid neighbors, crazy teachers, and rest of his life. Sure, Jack said, but what about homework? I heard Tyler talking about some kind of book report. Sam made a kind of hissing sound in the back of his throat. Fletcher family rules said that everyone's homework was done first, and nobody could play until all the work was done, even if everybody else was waiting for you. It was an effective strategy. There was nothing like a bunch of brothers breathing down your neck to get the ideas flowing. Sam himself had threatened to hockflum into Eli's drink if he didn't wrap up his research and finish already. 6th grade was off to an unpleasant start. 3 hours later, sweaty and mud-covered, Sam was feeling much better about things. Tyler wandered over, and Eli and Dad had arrived home just minutes after Sam finished his report, and an hour after Tyler and Jax taking shots on him, with Eli gamely defending. Sam was pretty confident about the first team practice tomorrow. He waved goodbye to Tyler just as Dad came outside. Guys, time to eat, Dad said, standing on back deck waving a pair of tongs at them to get their attention. Mr. Nelson, who was cutting roses from his bushes into a careful bouquet, scowled over at them. Sam couldn't help noticing how carefully his neighbor examined each rose before cutting it and adding it to the bunch. The dude was weird, that's for sure. First day of school dinner, yes! Eli and Jax raced each other to the house, jostling and shoving the whole way. Family Fletcher rules held that everybody got his favorite food on the first and last days of school. Once inside, Sam kicked off his muddy cleats and elbowed his brother out of the bathroom. Move it, Stink. You've been in here for 5 minutes already. He shut the door behind Jax, who was still arguing over whether the last goal would be disqualified because of the foul. The sink was brown with accumulated dirt of 3 pairs of hands, and Sam wiped it down the drain with an absent-minded contentiousness. By the time he finished washing his face and peering into the mirror to see if any hairs were beginning to sprout on his upper lip, the rest of the family was seated. "Finally," Eli said, staring at his plate with the intensity of a hunting dog pointing to a kill. "I think I'm suffering from addiction withdrawal symptoms. I haven't had dumplings in at least 2 weeks." Eli's first and last day meals were always the same. Chinese dumplings and spare ribs that Dad, and now Eli too, picked up on the way home from school. Sam's was spaghetti and meatballs with real, homemade, cook-all-day, make-in-the-house, smell-awesome sauce. Of course, at that moment, the house didn't smell like anything but sweaty boys since Papa had just defrosted the sauce he had frozen on the last day of school. Still, it was delicious. Frog was happy about instant macaroni and cheese. "In the purple box, not the blue box. The blue box is disgusting," he would tell anyone who was around. And Jax changed his mind each time. Tonight it was lobster and mashed potatoes. For a moment, the table was silent except for the sniffling, chewing, and swallowing of all different meals. Even Dad got his food choice, since it was his first day of school too. Rare grilled steak with mushrooms and peppers. Papa had a small portion of everyone's meal, making, he said, a most interesting, fascinating study in how something can be less than the sum of its parts. Finally, the eating slowed and Papa spoke. "So, who's going to go first? Eli, do you want to tell us about your new school?" The only answer was a sniffling grunt as Eli, who weighed less than Sam's soccer bag, shoved his seventh dumpling into his mouth. Papa grimaced slightly and turned away. "Okay, we'll get back to you when you've finished inhaling your food. What about you, Froggo? You already gave me the rundown when I picked you up, but tell Dad and your brothers about kindergarten." Frog grinned. His mouth ringed with a cheesy rim. "So good, and Flair loved it too. He has a special seat. And I made a new friend. Her name is Ladybug Lai, and she has 3 sisters and 2 moms." The rest of the table paused and looked at Frog, who continued eating, happily oblivious. Frog had what his preschool teacher had called an engaging and encompassing imaginary world, which Sam figured pretty much meant he was nuts. Papa and Dad, of course, thought the imaginary cheetah under his bed was perfectly normal. And they didn't think it was odd, for when 6 months last year, Frog told everyone he had a younger brother named Connecticut, who was only 2 but could read. The worst part was that several people believed him, which to Sam just showed how weird his family was. Dad spoke first. "That's nice. Did you meet any other kids?" Sam could tell Dad was avoiding asking if Frog had met any real friends. Frog could get very touchy if you tried to call him on his imaginary world. "Yep," Frog nodded. "I was in a group with Grace and Isabel and Rob and Noah and another Noah. Isabel tried to bite the other girl, but she's mostly nice. They were all pretty nice, except for the second Noah. He cried, and then he barfed, and then his mom came." And there was another moment of silence as they all considered the unfortunate Noah. "Did you learn anything? Did your teacher start teaching you to read?" This came from Eli, who was quite concerned that his younger brother was only sounding out words, despite their father's assurances that this was completely age appropriate. "Yeah, we did the alphabet and thought about words that start with A. I said airplane." "Aerodynamic," Eli said automatically. "Alligator," chimed in Papa. "As Sam began. "Samuel," Papa and Dad said together. "What?" Sam couldn't help from grinning as he tried to look innocent. "I was going to say assassinate. What did you think I was going to say?" Jax burst out laughing, spitting lobster all across the table, and a chorus of groans arose. Sam couldn't help snickering. Papa fixed him with a stink eye and said, "Well, since you're full of linguistic enrichment, why don't you tell us a bit about 6th grade? Sam's snort of laughter died down. It's time to get serious. 6th grade wasn't really something he felt like talking about. He shrugged. It was fine, the usual. Tyler and Connor and Joss are in my homeroom. I have Mr. Washbar for language arts. He was apoplectic, another word for A, frog. And he was on and on about how grades start to really matter this year. According to him, if we don't work hard on our English papers, we're probably going to wind up living in a cardboard box. Well, Dad said, that's a bit extreme. But he does have a point. Depending on how you do this year, your middle school classes will be different, which will then affect your high school classes and so on. Papa gave a quiet snort that everybody heard. No one needed to ask him why. Papa had dropped out of college his freshman year to start building a computer model full-time. He eventually sold it to some huge company for pots of money, which he'd promptly invested into some African water company. Then he invented something else and sold it. He was less impressed with grades and classes than Dad was. Whatever, Sam said. He inhaled another bite of dinner and swallowed it faster than seemed possible. I'll work hard, obviously, but I'm more worried about the Shipton Elite team tryouts in the spring. They went to Massachusetts state finals last year. They're really good. I mean, school's important and all, but this is soccer. He smiled as if he was joking, but he really didn't feel like it was a joke. Making the team as an almost 7th grader would be the most epic thing ever. Mercifully, Papa and Dad turned their attention to Jax. And what about 4th grade? Dad asked. Anything special going on there? We got an email about a year-long research project your grade is doing. Jax nodded, swallowing his last bit of lobster. It's called the Veteran Project. It's pretty cool. We find a veteran and interview him and research them using Google and stuff and write about what war they fought in. We're getting this whole timeline of when everything's due. We start it soon, but most of the work isn't until after winter vacation, and the final report is due in the spring. But anyways, the best reports will be printed in the paper. Sorry, voice cut out. The best reports will even be printed out in the paper. It'll be sick if I won. He was quiet for a moment. Do we know any veterans? That's a tough one, Dad said. I actually had a few uncles who served, but one of them died in combat when he was too young to really know him, and the other has never really been willing to talk about it. Sam said, I think Tyler's got a cousin or something who's over in the Middle East, but I guess she's not a veteran yet. She's still fighting. Well, we can think about it, Papa said, but it sounds like an interesting project. Whether or not you agree that all the wars that we have been with, the fact is these soldiers have interesting stories. Mr. Nelson's a veteran, Eli said, raising his face from his plate for the first time. He has a special license sticker and a sticker on his car that says, Vietnam Veteran, never forget. Sam and Jax groaned at the same time. And before either parent could say anything more, Jack started telling everyone about his locker and all the other treasures of 4th grade, and the dinner proceeded peacefully. It wasn't until Sam and Frog were taking their turns loading the dishwasher that Sam realized they had never heard about Eli's new school. Stay tuned for Chapter 5. Bye-bye.